Hartford. I want to thank Hartford Votes Coalition for hosting it tonight. Again, I'm Paul Doyle. I'm running for Attorney General. I'm a native of Wethersfield, a few miles from here. I grew up in a household of public service. My father was an active Democrat in Wethersfield and earlier in Hartford. He later became a judge. Ella Grasso appointed him a judge, which is a proud day for my family. My mother was an English teacher. She also was nominated and was a runner-up state teacher of the year in the mid-'80s. A while ago for some maybe younger people, but Governor O'Neill gave her that honor. That was a great day. Because of the inspiration of my parents, I've dedicated my life to public service. I'm a graduate of the Wethersfield Public School System. I'm proud to be a graduate of Wethersfield High School in 1981. Thereafter, I went to Colby College in Maine. Then I came back from college and I came back to Wethersfield. I immediately got involved with the Democratic Party. I worked for the state party. Tim Moynihan was chairman. After that, I worked for Governor William O'Neill as a young pup learning about the process. And thereafter, I went to law school, graduated from UConn Law School. And today, as a result of UConn Law School, I've been practicing law for 27 years. In addition to that, my commitment to public service is also 27 years. I was elected to Wethersfield Town Council for 3 years, elected to the State House for 12 years, and now I'm completing my 12th year in the State Senate. I'm proud of my dedication to the state of Connecticut and my commitment to the public, and it's my pleasure tonight to present my candidacy for Attorney General. Thank you.
My name is Chris Maddy. I'm a candidate for Attorney General, and I spent the better part of the last decade as the chief of the Financial Fraud and Public Corruption Unit for the United States Department of Justice here in Connecticut. I supervise federal prosecutors, federal agents all over the state of Connecticut every single day, trying to deliver clean and accountable government to people living in Connecticut in fair and transparent markets. And I'm running for Attorney General for one reason. Because over the last number of decades, far too many people in our state and in our society feel as though they've been left behind. Far too many people feel that power in society has accumulated at the very, very top, and fewer people have a voice of their own. And the Attorney General is that one role in state government whose responsibility it is to stick up for people like that. To wake up every morning and go to bat for families who otherwise wouldn't have a lawyer sticking up for them. Not because you're getting paid by the hour, but because that's your responsibility. And so I've spent my career standing up to the abuse of power in federal court. And I know that right now, every fight that we as Democrats care about, every fight that Donald Trump is thrusting upon us, whether it's on immigration, or on guns, or on reproductive choice with the Supreme Court hanging in the balance, or on the environment, all of these fights are going to be waged in federal courtrooms over the next 2 years. There's a reason that those 2 children who are housed in Connecticut and separated from their families are now reunited with their parents. And it isn't because Donald Trump developed a conscience. And it isn't because the legislature or the governor could do anything about it. It's because they have lawyers who are willing to go to bat for them in court, make an argument that their constitutional rights have been violated, and they won. I think we need an Attorney General who has gone into federal court and stood up to the abuse of power, no matter where it was. That's why I'm running. Thank you very much.
We have the order for the questions for Attorney General. And the first question, we'll start with Paul Doyle, and then William Tong, and then Chris Maddy. So 3 minutes to you, Paul. The first question is, what is the role of the Attorney General?
The role of the Attorney General, I believe, is twofold. It's been, my opponents often talk about the importance of challenging Donald Trump, which I 100% agree with. I support George Jepsen has filed 44 lawsuits against the Trump administration. In the last 2 years, against the Trump administration, against the Obama administration, he filed 4. So that's a significant part of the job. I would take that very seriously. I think we, for instance, I've worked on, I had a press conference on Route 95 in Milford in connection with the zombie trucks, the high polluting trucks, to basically emphasize the importance of Mr. Pruitt's final act to eliminate the cap on these heavy duty polluting trucks. Recently, the California Federal District Court prohibited that, maintained the cap. So I do support generally the right to women's health care, for environmental issues, for net neutrality, and basically challenging the Trump administration. I don't think anyone knows where the Trump administration is going to go from this day forward, but I'm confident all 3 of us, to be honest, would equally challenge the Trump administration, whatever decisions he makes. Now, I will not challenge every decision President Trump makes. If a decision makes sense, I will not file a lawsuit based on ambition or publicity. I would file it on what's based on the law and what's best for the people. But I believe, with that being said, it's a very important part of the job. But to me, there's an equally important part of the job being the people's lawyer, basically fighting for you, the people, to be the consumer protection advocate that you deserve. What I want to do is, once I get elected, incorporate a 24-hour hotline where citizens can call the Attorney General's office anytime, give information about constituent problems you may have with government or insurance companies, but also give information to the office about scams. And the current scam out there really, as you're probably aware, is the IRS scam. I think it's important. The IRS scam where people portray and target senior citizens saying, wire me money or we will take your home. That's an example where I think the Attorney General can get out front and notify the public of these scams. So to be your next Attorney General, it's twofold. It's certainly challenging Donald Trump. I'm prepared for it. I support all of Attorney General Jepsen's 44 lawsuits. But in addition, it's important to be the people's lawyer. I look forward to defending you and all your consumer rights. So again,
Paul and William are offering primarily their legislative experience, which I respect. But when you think about where these fights are being waged, where it really matters, where the Attorney General really has authority to make a difference, it is in the courtroom. It is in investigations. You want to know the most important investigation the Attorney General has going on right now? It's the investigation in the pharmaceutical company's complicity in the opioids crisis. And you know where that investigation is going to be resolved? It's going to be resolved in our favor if we have an Attorney General who knows how to lead complex investigations of institutions like the pharmaceutical industry. That's how the tobacco litigation was settled in our favor. And I'm glad that William mentioned Dick Blumenthal, because you know where Dick Blumenthal got his start? At the Attorney General, at the U.S. Attorney's Office. As a U.S. Attorney, as a federal prosecutor, as somebody who could go into court and make a difference for people. And let me just say this, you know, when I was at the U.S. Attorney's Office, I used to get calls from lawyers representing banks or corporate CEOs or corrupt politicians, and they want to come in and meet with me. And they come in with 10 lawyers, all of them making $1,000 an hour, trying to convince me that it was just some innocent misunderstanding. But guess what? If you're not powerful like that, if you're not from the right neighborhood, or you don't have the right balance in your bank account, the Attorney General is your lawyer, waking up every day thinking about you and your family. That's the job. The question is, what authority does the Attorney General have right now to act on behalf of victims of social injustice? And the truth is that authority does exist. In fact, the federal civil rights statutes explicitly confer authority to the Attorney Generals in the states to bring civil rights actions without the need for legislation. Let me just give you a few examples of what the Attorney General can do right now. Not by going and hanging out at the legislature, but right now by directing the lawyer's activities. The Attorney General has authority under the Connecticut Unfair Trade Practices Act to root out absentee slumlords in our urban areas. You know, I was in New Haven a month ago, not going around talking to prime Democratic voters, just talking to people on their porches. There was a woman there with 2 grandkids. They have elevated levels of lead in their blood, and they have mice in every room in the house because there's an absentee slumlord who she can't get on the phone. Now, the Attorney General can't take on every absentee slumlord, but those who are repeat offenders and systemically causing blight in urban neighborhoods, that's something that the Attorney General should take on. You want to talk about social justice? What about the right to reproductive choice? Making sure that women have equal access to contraception. And if the Supreme Court ends up overturning Roe v. Wade and you have an emboldened Republican Congress that's bent on restricting choice nationally, you're going to need an Attorney General who can go into court and block that on behalf of Connecticut women. Our Constitution protects the right to choose here in Connecticut. That's a social justice issue. 30 seconds left. Let me keep going. Housing discrimination. Housing discrimination is a social justice issue and a racial justice issue. We've seen under-enforcement in that area. And let me just talk about one other issue. William is right that the Attorney General has a responsibility to speak out on issues where he or she may not have legal jurisdiction but bear on fundamental fairness, racial justice, criminal justice, right? And as somebody who has seen the impacts of economic injustice, racial injustice, that's something that the Attorney General has unique power for because people view that office with the credibility it deserves, and that's how I would hope to use it. Thank you.
Separation policy of the Trump administration. It's indefensible. President Obama had a more rational policy, and it's an important role to support the litigation to challenge Trump, the separation policy. But in addition to that, the United States Attorney General has an ability to communicate, work with the society. And what I did was I contacted all the law schools to try to create an internship with the 4 law schools. I wrote to the deans with the goal of creating an internship program throughout all the law schools, because 70% of the individuals crossing the border are not represented. If we can pull our law schools together to create a policy where we have greater representation, that's a good start. But in addition, the Attorney General as attorney for the people, you can represent them as a mouthpiece. It's not always in court. When I was recently touring the North End, I was walking around right after a shooting. I basically was with one of the community leaders in Hartford learning about it, and they were asking me, once you're Attorney General, please work with us, get in the community, work with us, and use the mouthpiece of the office. So in addition to challenging actual injustices, I plan on reaching out into the communities, learning about the issues, and helping the people. The actual mouthpiece of the Attorney General is a strong policy, which I will support, and I think we can be very effective for you.
Charged with representing the state agencies, and state officials. If the newly elected governor is from a different political party than you, how will you handle the obligations of the office if you disagree with the governor's policy directives?
Let me start off by saying this. No matter who the governor is, no matter which party they are in, if you're the Attorney General, you want to make sure that the governor is following your advice. Because the advice that you're giving to him or her, you believe is in the best interest of the state of Connecticut. And so you would hope that you have a good working relationship with whoever that person is. But there will be times if the Republican governor or a Republican legislature acts in ways that you believe are unconstitutional or indefensible in court, where you have to exercise your own independent judgment, your own independent obligations as a lawyer, and to stand up against that and say what you are proposing is violative of the Connecticut Constitution, and I cannot in good faith defend it in court. And let me give you some examples of where that might arise. Republican candidates for governor have already said that they want to break open the CBAC agreement with state employees, that they want to do away with collective bargaining, and that they are committed to breaking those contracts if they enter office. Now, if that happens, that would be unlawful. And not only would it be unlawful, but it would expose the state of Connecticut to tremendous amounts in damages in the event that we were to lose that lawsuit. And so you would need the Attorney General to stand up and say, what you're trying to do, Republican governor, not only violates the principles of collective bargaining and the rights of working people to come together to negotiate the terms of their employment, but it would expose the state of Connecticut to tremendous legal liability. What if the Supreme Court overturns Roe versus Wade, and the state of Connecticut, Republican governor and Republican legislature decides, you know what, we're going to try to restrict choice here in Connecticut, even though the Connecticut Supreme Court has said that the Connecticut Constitution protects the right to choose. If that happens, the Attorney General has an independent obligation to protect the people of the state of Connecticut, defend the Connecticut Constitution, and that's what would be required. You know, we're often called upon as lawyers to assess whether or not what we are arguing in good faith and is done in good conscience. And when I was at the U.S. Attorney's Office, my obligation every single day was to just do what I believed was right. Free from politics, free from, whatever pressures the press might be giving you. Do what you believe is right. And so when you're asking yourself, which Attorney General candidate do you want to support? Think about what we've done. I started off as a teacher on the Navajo reservation. I went on to become a union organizer for low-wage hospital workers. I've dedicated my life to fighting for people in courtrooms who have been exploited, taking on corruption in both parties, Republican and Democrat, taking on Wall Street corruption on behalf of people here in Connecticut. So you don't need to worry about whether or not I'm going to be kowtowing to a Republican governor. The only people I serve are the people of the state of Connecticut. Thank you.
In the legislature, I have a record of doing what's right and being independent. I have a proven record. When you have difficult decisions, you do what's right for the people, what's under the law. Your next Attorney General has to do the same. Your next Attorney General has to make decisions not based on future ambition, what's the next law? If, unfortunately, a Democrat does not get elected as your next governor, and a Republican is elected, I'm prepared to adhere to my constitutional duty to represent the people in the next administration. However, if anyone up here is prepared to challenge the incumbent governor, I have a proven track record of taking on, making the right decision regardless of any political influences. So, yes, I would respect the next governor, whoever is selected, but if that person, and it will be male this time, there's no woman, but and that person, I will certainly stand up to him if he goes contrary to the law. And in my overall, in my career, I've proven that. And I just think that we need to create a positive approach to the office. I am prepared to do that. I think that the next Attorney General has to have the skill and the courage to make the difficult decisions. I've made it in the past. I will make it as your next Attorney General, focus on what's best for the people, and what's best for under the law, and not future ambition.
So the question is, what can the Attorney General do? Not what can the legislature do, what can the Attorney General do? And there are important ways that the Attorney General can have a positive impact on criminal justice reform. The Attorney General represents the Department of Corrections when it is sued. And in fact, right now in private practice, I represent victims of civil rights violations. I have sued the Department of Corrections on behalf of families whose loved ones committed suicide while they were in prison because they didn't have adequate access to mental health treatment and drug counseling. And so one of the things that the Attorney General can do is use that leverage to make sure that the Department of Corrections is in fact providing for the civil rights and mental health needs and substance abuse needs of people who are incarcerated. Not only because they are entitled to that once they have been taken into custody, but because it's the right thing to do, and it's a way to make sure that when they return home, they are in the best position possible. The Attorney General can force that kind of reform. Also, one of the issues that we talk about a lot is the legalization of marijuana. I'm the only candidate on this stage who supports the legalization and regulation of marijuana. With respect, both William and Paul Doyle have adamantly opposed that in the legislature. The reason that it matters is because it is a criminal justice issue. The presence of marijuana, the odor of marijuana, is still used by police officers as a reason to stop somebody on the street, as a reason to get into somebody's car. It still results in the over-policing of poor communities of color. And so legalizing marijuana has many, many benefits, including on opioid addiction and other things. It's also a criminal justice issue, and we're going to need an Attorney General who's prepared to defend it, not just opposed to it. So this is something that the Attorney General, in real time, can have an impact on. And that's what I'm committed to doing.
How fortunate it was, I had two parents that basically presented a household of public service. My father, an active Democrat, a judge, and my mother, a teacher. So I do recognize where I came from, not of super wealth, but a great family, and I was very fortunate to come from a family where both parents were my role models. Recently at the Capitol, we've had a lot of issues in my career, but this year in particular, we've had a lot of heated caucuses where we have to kind of, address the divisions in society, and certain of my colleagues cause problems. We had a heated caucus. Senator McCrory is here tonight, where basically it's what I'm all about is I appreciate where I came from. I appreciate that I was fortunate that both my parents were home and role models, and I have to go into meet others that are less fortunate in other communities and learn what their how their unfortunate upbringing led them where they are. So my goal is to get into the communities, appreciate where the people came from, and fight for them as the next Attorney General. Because yes, I was fortunate. I wasn't a millionaire or anything like that, but I had two good parents. Not everybody does in the state of Connecticut. I appreciate that fact that individuals didn't come where I came from. I want to fight for them. I want to get to know, get in the communities as your Attorney General, introduce myself to them, and fight for them as the people's Attorney General.
Well, first of all, I just want to say that it is an honor for me to be up on the stage with all of these candidates, and hearing their stories, I think, reminds all of us as Democrats, who we care about and who we're out here fighting for. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that. The question was about being successful. The
How do
reality
you
is,
attribute your success?
nobody is successful on their own. Nobody is. You know, my father's sitting over here. Everything I am in life is because of what my parents did for me. When I was growing up in Windsor, I was successful because I went to a school system that people thought it was worth funding. I went to a school system where they paid their teachers enough so that their teachers could actually afford to live and teach our children. That's why I've been successful. I was successful because when I was in middle school, I got into some trouble. And there was a police officer came to my house. I thought my parents were going to kill me. And, you know, he explained to me, you're messing up. Because he cared enough to come out to my house and tell me. My grandmother lived with us when I was growing up. She's this little Italian lady. And she used to say that you can tell a lot about somebody by how they act when they don't think anybody's watching. Now, she was always watching. But I always felt, as a result of growing up with people like that, who taught me how to do things the right way, and that what mattered was being able to look at yourself in the mirror at the end of the day, more than anything else, more than money, more than anything else. That's what I attribute any success I've had to. And the people who helped me, you know. I mean, I got a bunch of volunteers here for our campaign. Nothing that happens in this campaign happens without them. When I was at a federal prosecutor, every case we brought, it wasn't me, it was the federal agents who did it, it was the secretary. Although I haven't served in the legislature, I supported driver's license for undocumented immigrants, in part because it's a public safety issue. You want to make sure people who are out on the roads are safe. You want to make sure people get to work. I supported tuition for Dreamers. And the principal challenges that we're going to face on the immigration front over the next 2 years are, in fact, going to be resolved in federal courtrooms. That's the reality. So when it comes to the Dreamers, we have 10,000 Dreamers in Connecticut right now. In fact, when I announced that I was running for Attorney General, I asked one of them, Jonathan Gonzalez, to introduce me because he had shown such courage in his own fight. If, in fact, President Trump and the Congress do not act on DACA, and President Trump's rescission of President Obama's DACA protections goes into effect, we are going to have to go to court on behalf of our 10,000 kids right here in Connecticut. We are not going to have a choice. They will be subject to removal otherwise. And they have certain rights that have been conferred upon them by President Obama. That court case is going to be resolved in federal court. No phone call is going to do it. A legal argument is going to do it. When you think about the family separation policy, as soon as we heard that Donald Trump was separating children from parents at the border, I called on Governor Malloy to conduct a review of all agencies in the state of Connecticut to determine whether any children were being housed in Connecticut under that policy, because I knew if there were, we could bring a legal action on their behalf. And in fact, there were two, a 9-year-old boy, a 14-year-old girl. And as I said at the beginning, you know, I believe that the Attorney General should have been involved on their behalf on that case. They were fortunate to be represented by the Yale Clinic and the Connecticut Legal Services, where I sit on the board. There wasn't a phone call that helped them. It was lawyers who were trained and experienced to go into federal court and make a constitutional claim on behalf of their civil rights. Civil rights cases like the ones I've brought. Those communities need our help, they need our protection. It's who we are, and that's what we need our next Attorney General to do, is to get on the case. I do think, having been a lawyer who's represented people whose rights have been violated, that although your first obligation is to represent the legal interests of the state of Connecticut when the state is being sued, I think you also have to recognize that people who are suing the state are citizens too, are constituents too, and to make sure that they're dealt with fairly, so that they feel like no matter what result the litigation may take, that they have confidence that the state of Connecticut treated them fairly. I think that's important in any case. The Attorney General's office primarily has civil authority. It's also true that many of those cases end up in court. And I'm the only attorney here who's actually tried cases in court, who's actually led other lawyers in that effort. That's ultimately where a lot of these disputes are resolved. So it's one thing to say that you've represented large commercial corporations. It's another thing to have said, I've actually handled matters in court where I've represented people whose interests were at stake. Voting booth, I want you to think about you and your families. What kind of lawyer you would count on to represent you and your kids in the most important of your own affairs. I want you to think about that 9-year-old boy from Honduras sitting in a shelter, not knowing when he's going to see his parents again. Doesn't speak the language, doesn't know where he is, hasn't talked to his parents in months. What kind of lawyer would he want if he had one choice? Going into court, sticking up for him. Would he want somebody who'd spent his career fighting for justice in court? Fighting the abuse of power in court? Fighting for people's civil rights in court? Is that the kind of lawyer he would trust to reunite him with his parents? Because that's what's at stake in this election. Not just for him, but for all of you. And so when you go into that ballot booth, you think about what kind of lawyer you want representing you.
This evening is a wonderful evening, and thanks to all of you for attending. When you go to vote, I want you to think about one thing. I want to be your Attorney General. In December of 17, I was running for re-election to the state Senate. Something happened a week later. George Jefferson shocked the world and decided not to run again. At that point in time, I made the decision I want to be your next Attorney General. My opponents were running for other offices at that point. My sole focus is to serve as Attorney General. I want to fight the Trump administration. I also want to fight for you. My experience as a lawyer, there's different comments. When I graduated from law school in 1990, I made the decision, rather than working for a big corporate firm for the big money and the faceless corporate clients, I want to represent you, people in this room. My entire career of 27 years as a lawyer, I've been representing you in criminal court, civil court, probate court, your typical family problems. I can bring that to the job of Attorney General, fighting for you, and I want to serve as your Attorney General. This is not a stepping stone for another office. Thank you.
Thank you.